Welcome to Reach Mind's Thoughts for Your Life's Journey. In today's episode, we'll be doing a deep dive into the topic that affects many of us, yet it's still often misunderstood, which is trauma and what it is. Now we know that in our social media-driven world, the term trauma is often overused and misapplied and potentially diluting its real significance. Traumatizing experiences don't always look the way we expect. They are not always singular, acute, life-altering events, incorporating also complex relational difficulties that can start from childhood. The long-term effects of trauma are far-reaching and can shape everything from how we interact with others and how we view and navigate the world as adults. Today, even more nuances is the fact that what is traumatizing to one person may not be the same for others, depending on how they were raised, whether they experienced overwhelming threats more than once, and other factors, so that it is said that trauma expresses on something of a spectrum, that it's not all in one place. Now, in this episode, we will be unpacking some of these ideas with special focus on the impact of complex trauma and how relational wounds like neglect or witnessing violence leave lasting scars. We'll explore resilience and the role of environment in healing, and why understanding the root causes of trauma is so crucial. Now, I'm joined by a remarkable guest, Charlotte Nicholson, who is a teacher, guide, facilitator trained in numerous styles of yoga and other embodiment practices, modalities, adapting from addressing trauma. She has offered therapeutic support using trauma-sensitive yoga to individuals living through anxiety, depression, compulsion, deregulation, eating disorder, and PTSD. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for agreeing on this very important subject that I know that I've certainly attended some neuroscience sessions on trauma, and I can't profess to really understand it completely, except I know it's on a spectrum and that sometimes we overuse it. So what's your take on the everyday term that we all use casually on trauma?
It might help actually if I define some terms here.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Helpful. Because even I use the word trauma out of context because it's a shortcut, but there's multiple layers to it. And it might help your listeners to understand the differences. But so if we're using the word trauma, it really refers to a kind of single overwhelming event, an event that really overwhelms our nervous system and really threatens our sense of safety and security. So if you're going to use the word a trauma, that's what the context is for that. Then there's traumatic stress, which is potentially what a lot of people are meaning when they use the word trauma. So this is a response that happens in our body minds in order to, like a reaction to this overwhelming experience, which can basically lead to long-term symptoms. So that might be coping mechanisms. So it might be, for example, flashbacks. It might be nightmares. It could be behaviors like addiction to numb pain, to avoid painful memories. It might be hypervigilance, that kind of edginess and jumpiness, meaning that your nervous system remains on a state of high alert. Or it could be avoidance, avoiding people, avoiding places, avoiding certain actions. So patterns of avoidance, which can also show up in relationship as well. So that's traumatic stress, symptoms of traumatic stress. And some of these will, in people, in some people, these will resolve over time. In other people, they don't. And they're persistent over time. and they interfere with capacity to live life-limiting symptoms. They become life-limiting and shape how we see the world and move through the world in a sort of ever more concrete way. And that's when it becomes PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And at that point becomes a clinical diagnosis. And then there's complex PTSD, which you mentioned in your intro. And just to define difference between PTSD and complex PTSD, PTSD refers to these symptoms that have happened in reaction to a single overwhelming event. So that could be an attack or assault. It could be war trauma. It could be an assault. I said that, didn't I? Assault. It could be an assault or accident. It could be war trauma, or it could be something like a natural disaster. And then you've got CPTSD, complex PTSD, which was only recorded as a clinical diagnosis by the WHO in 2018, so very recent, and the result of lobbying by people like Bessel van der Kolk to get it recognized. This is caused by repeated and prolonged exposure to traumatizing events and experiences. So it's usually characterized by starting young, potentially even in babyhood or early childhood, within caregiving systems. And it's relational, it's happening between people. It is trauma that is caused in relationship. So it might be abuse, emotional, physical, it might be neglect. If a child has an addicted parent or a parent with depression, for example, who can't mirror them and recognize their needs, meet their needs. It might be witnessing domestic violence. So these are all called adverse childhood experiences. And because they're happening within the caregiving system, they're often repeated again and again. So there's lots of compounding factors. And over time, it affects the developing brain of the child. So these coping mechanisms that the child has get embedded as neural pathways, cemented almost as what we would call personality. And then in adult life, these coping mechanisms that the young person or child developed that help them survive their youth and this difficult environment become maladaptive in later life and really get in the way of healthy relationships, being able to live a full and healthy life, being able to trust people. Yeah, so that's complex PTSD. So it has an impact on our capacity to be able to control our emotions, which is vital in relationship. It can cause learning difficulties, difficulty reading others and social cues, low self-worth and warped ideas of self-concept, attachment difficulties. So in avoidant attachment, anxious attachment. So all of these things, we're social creatures, and all of these things have an impact on how we relate with other adults and therefore live a healthy, trusting life in community.
Just a kind of couple of things I want to say for the sake of the listener. When you say WHO, it's the World Health Organization.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that because not everybody will know WHO as a kind of organization. And so what you're describing, I guess, is the spectrum of how trauma can impact on people. And obviously there is some severe, the complex end of it. And it makes me actually think about how maybe in schools, if you happen to be a child who's a person of color, can be repetitively told you're not good enough or you're naughty, and how that can actually have an impact on the way they may navigate the world if people don't pick that up quickly in their sort of behavioral aspects of how they're showing up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point. That would be an environment where repeated traumatic experience could become complex trauma. It's just happening again and again and again and becoming embedded. I think even though we said, oh, the word trauma, it's not necessarily always accurate. I do want to just add that I think it's great that more people are talking about it, because There has been for many years a fundamental misunderstanding of what does traumatize us and what does constitute traumatic stress. I had a conversation with a really dear friend not long ago who had a very challenging time through the pandemic where they were locked down by themselves, a single person locked down by themselves, someone who is normally gregarious and outgoing and really values community and connection, a very active member of the community. So it had a huge impact on mental health, quickly followed by a very unexpected redundancy from a much loved role and profession. And this friend has been dealing with PTSD and complex PTSD as a result. But was having a conversation with a family member and trying to express what's been happening and seek support. And the family member said, "Oh, yes, but that's not really trauma, is it? Let's be honest. Trauma is people getting blown up in war or seeing their friends blown up, or it's refugees. That's trauma, not this." And so really minimizing and negating the experience. And so actually, I think it's valuable that there's a much bigger, broader conversation about not comparing people's experiences and understanding the breadth of what is overwhelming to a human's nervous system and sense of self and capacity to cope.
Just on that, Charlotte, the nervous system, can you unpack that a little bit?
If you are in a situation where you feel like you might die or you are your survival is threatened, there are various mechanisms that our nervous system has to call on in terms of what to do. And you might be, or your listeners as well, might be familiar with these terms of kind of fight, flight, freeze, which is when on our sympathetic nervous system, the activating part of our nervous system kicks into action because our brain has detected, oh, there's a threat in the environment and it might impact my survival. And this cascade of hormones is released and it kicks certain things into gear. Now, depending on the situation, it might be that we're able to run away and escape, in which case the blood goes to all our muscles and away from our digestive organs and anything that we don't need for immediate flight. And the heart rate goes up, breathing rate goes up. Or it might be fight, in which case it's to say this laser focus and strength in the muscles. And people talk about superhuman strength, grannies being able to lift cars off children or that kind of thing. It's the fight response. But there are some cases, and when people are running or fighting, in the process of that, they are discharging that nervous system energy out of the system. Something is being done to help themselves. But then there are some situations, and particularly if you're thinking about complex trauma and children who often can't escape or defend themselves, where maybe freeze, for just trying to make myself as small as possible and hide and disappear and not be seen by the aggressor, or whether that's an angry parent or an abusive parent or something else. And all that energy is being contained. It's got nowhere to go. It's being contained. And if that is happening repeatedly over a long period of time, that starts to impact the reset mechanism by which our nervous system is able to reset itself, release and discharge that energy and regulate back to a kind of baseline. Or there's a sort of playing dead response, collapse, which operates from a different part of our nervous system, a very primitive part of the parasympathetic nervous system, where all muscle tone disappears and breathing and heart rate actually go through the floor. They drop really low, and there's a sort of almost a playing dead. In the animal kingdom, that's what it would look like. In humans, it's dazed, floppy, checking out situation, and really and very dissociative. So it's almost like you're not there. You're not there. You're just not present with. You can't escape. What's happening is awful, and very cleverly, our psyche has a capacity to absent parts of itself, so that we're not having to endure the full experience, and that's what is known as dissociation. But you can imagine that if that is happening repeatedly and dissociation becomes a repeated strategy for coping and completely understandable in later life, or as that person becomes older and in an older child or in later life, anytime they're stressed, they'll recourse to that strategy again and again. And it means that you're just not you're absent for life. You're not showing up for life. You're just not there, not experiencing life. And also it impacts memory. If you're not there, which we can move on to this, if you're not there present, there are memories not being recorded in conscious narrative recall, narrative memory. And that is when things can lead to problems with PTSD, because although your body beneath consciousness is recording feelings of terror, feelings of maybe painful sensations in your body or very uncomfortable feelings, smells, colors, flashes of imagery, whatever, or words or sounds, whatever that might be. These are all recorded in what's called implicit memory, which happens beneath consciousness and lives in our body, almost like shrapnel in a way. And it's preventing explicit narrative memory from being laid down in a healthy way, which enables us to put words and meaning to what is happening after the event and give it a beginning and a middle and an end. So what that means is that whenever someone is triggered by, it might even be a car banging or a car horn, or it might be someone who vaguely looks like an attacker or is wearing the same colored jumper or something like that. It can be very innocuous. But before they know what's happening, because it happens so quickly and it happens beneath conscious awareness, all those terrible body sensations, as if the traumatic experience is happening again, are reactivated, and they're reliving it, but they don't know why. There's no executive brain going, applying logic and going, okay, I'm feeling terrible, but nothing is actually happening to me. I'm safe. That is absent. And so this terrifying symptoms are being reactivated, and there's no way of making sense of it, putting it into context or having perspective. So there are these very clever ways in which our body can help us. Playing dead in the animal kingdom, sometimes that means the attacker gets bored and walks off, or gives up and walks off. There's some great footage of this. Or leaves the body for later, or gets distracted and goes off to deal with something else, and there's an opportunity to escape. So there are lots of ways in which this can also be adaptive. Amazingly clever ways that we have of protecting ourselves. The fawning response is another one that's become more familiar recently. Ingratiating ourselves, people pleasing, trying to negate our needs to meet others. It's called the fawning response. That's a sort of interplay of nervous system reactions as well. So there's all these incredible ways we can protect ourselves. But when the system gets overwhelmed, or we're having to use them repeatedly over a long period of time, such they become aspects of our personality, that we almost impulses and compulsions, then it interferes with being able to live a healthy, happy, connected, productive life. I hope that made sense.
Absolutely. I think what I am taking away is that we carry the stuff in our bodies, and eventually what we do is we just suppress it. That we know it's there. However, it takes a lot of energy, I would imagine, to do that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I think what you're saying is we disassociate with that. And I certainly have seen individuals who are dissociated with them, with their emotions, and yet they're highly functional.
Yes.
In the world, and they're very successful. Yet, you know that there is so much way of what you were describing earlier on, seeing the world. It's almost like you're on ready, but they're not conscious of it, but their bodies are. Everything is an attack in a sense, or a competition to whatever their story is, but it's a trauma that's replicated. And I think you could be in your 50s, 60s, or even 70s and still carry this around for a lifetime.
Absolutely. And it can eventually, it starts to express as physical symptoms, exhaustion, adrenal fatigue. Our nervous systems aren't meant to be activated for those prolonged periods of time, and something gives. Adrenal fatigue, things like depression, mental illness, but also people can go through periods of depression without it having to be pathologized. But it's increasingly being understood as, if you think about the word depress, as you just said, it's pressing down stuff inside you, these wounds, these are difficult emotions that you don't really want to feel. You get so good at numbing yourself from these negative feelings that eventually you start to numb yourself from all feelings, including joy.
Yes.
So these, and positive feelings and hopefulness. So it becomes this sort of filter over life, not wanting to move or feeling unable to move. It's like the body saying, I need a rest. There's nothing left in the tank. And yeah, so there can be a lot of, in response to depression, it's, oh, just need to get up and keep going, need to get up and need to move. And actually, maybe the reverse is true. Maybe what you need is rest. Maybe what you need is to surrender to some degree to this imploring from your body to stop.
I want to also come back to something we touched on earlier on about the environment. How do sort of social, environmental, relational factors like racism or wars influence how trauma is processed?
So there's this word called intersectionality.
Yeah.
Now, racism hasn't been my experience, and it's not my area of expertise, but I have studied, and I do know about, and I have experienced other kinds of discrimination that this word intersectionality speaks to, meaning there are certain privileges or not privileges that we are born with in life, or for example, skin color might be one of them. Resources, so whether you're born into a family of wealth or poverty, whether you're a woman or a man, whether you're heterosexual or not heterosexual, gay or queer, or you don't identify as one or other gender, all of these things can play a role in compounding or creating layers of traumatizing experiences. So you mentioned a kid in the playground who's repeatedly picked on or discriminated against because of the color of their skin. You know, if that kid is also from a background of poverty and has less opportunities in life, less access to resources, there's another layer of being locked out of, how do I want to say this? Maybe having as full an experience or as rich an experience of all that is available in life. In later life, if that child is a female, a woman, there may be certain disadvantages, for example, in the workplace, where they are paid less. And when that is a war of attrition over time, that wage gap and that being valued less for doing the same things, for being in a meeting room and talking about your ideas and being humored, but then the same ideas come from someone else who might be a different skin color, who might be male, and they're celebrated and jumped on. And there are ways in which the way we show up in the world, our wealth state, our economic status, the color of our skin, our sex, our gender, can build like sediment layers of traumatizing experience that lead to even greater disadvantage, or when you said in terms of difficulty processing, they may preclude access to help and support, the kind of help and support, compassionate, empathetic help and support that you need to work through that because of not having enough money to access that, being reliant entirely on the national health system and with its incredibly long waiting lists at the moment, instead of being able to say, oh, I'm going to go private. because this person has a great reputation and I'm not getting what I need here, and I'm going to go private and try and find what I need from someone who looks like me, someone who recognizes me, someone who understands me better. Even female friends who've struggled to get the help they need from male doctors, who've had their symptoms, perimenopause symptoms, menopause symptoms, all kinds of other symptoms minimized and dismissed by particularly white male doctors as, not valid, or they're making it up, or they're misdiagnosing themselves or something. They're just not being seen and heard. And that is traumatizing. Especially when it compounds over time, because it completely removes control and agency from that person if they cannot access the support and help that they need. And therefore, there's a sense of, I can't do anything to help myself, overwhelmed. My system is overwhelmed. I can't find the help I need to downregulate and meet my needs. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Absolutely. And I guess it touches on, for me, around the differentiation between trauma and stress, because my sister went to the doctors yesterday, and she's in senior years, and she's got spots on her face, and the doctor said, don't you want to grow gracefully old? Because she said she's never, and she was quite stressed by his comment, as if because she's older she shouldn't be worrying about her skin, just grow gracefully old. I just wondered whether trauma, stress, and do we, just to add another spin to it, are we in a danger sometimes pathologizing normal emotional responses to find balance?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's an interesting thing here that I want, and I've got it written down, so I'm just going to read something in response to this idea of pathologizing our normal human range of emotions. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is a huge psychiatric document that is updated every so often and is used for categorizing and diagnosing psychiatric disorders, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, mental health disorders, essentially. Now, that was in 1952, the first version was published, and that cited 106 disorders.
Wow.
That might be diagnosed. There was a fourth edition, which was published in 1997, and that listed 297 potential mental health disorders that clinicians might use to diagnose. DSM-5, which is the latest edition, and was published in 2013, lists 313 disorders. So, is it that we're all getting more mentally unwell, or is it that there's some kind of, I don't know, medicalization of all human experience going on here? Which seems more likely. And I think there are a lot of pressures playing into this, that you keep using the word balance, which I wholly agree with, which we need to find a balance. On the one hand, I agree that destigmatizing and talking about mental ill health has been so vital and destigmatizing. But on the other hand, there's this sort of world in which nothing is healthy and a normal adaptive response to a stressful situation anymore. It has some kind of diagnosis. It seems like there might be a few pressures playing into this. One of them being this kind of, I've seen it called 10-minute medicine. The NHS, the time you have your GP is down to about 10 minutes now.
It is.
You can't understand someone as a unique being who's undergone unique stresses and challenges and figure out hear their life story and figure, okay, they adapted to that in that way, they adapted to that in that way. In other words, and we've talked about this before, asking the question, what happened to you? Instead of, okay, what's wrong? What's presenting? There's limited time, here's a pill, or here's a referral to this specialist, here's a diagnosis, go and speak to that. It's that there isn't time to fully understand each person as a unique being with their own adaptive responses, and therefore tailor an approach that meets that person's needs. There's a sort of immediate reaching for a kind of clinical diagnosis or a drug or something like that. There are also increasingly more drugs and pills available for things. So there's that whole other area as well. So that's one issue. Then I think you've touched on this as well. There's this normalization that's happened increasingly with the expansion of awareness of mental ill health, of normalizing using words like anxiety and depression for like a bad day at work. Oh God, I'm so depressed. I had such a crap day at work. I'm feeling really depressed. I can't come back. To describe passing states, which is all over social media. We've all seen, I think we've probably all seen it, people normalizing these diagnoses in the way that they're talking about themselves day to day. Or you're so OCD.
Yeah.
I've worked with someone who had OCD, and I know how life-limiting those symptoms can be. It's not just about being super tidy. It interferes with having a life.
Yeah.
So it's a completely other level. And then there's this Dr. Google self-diagnosing. And look, it's amazing that everyone has access to so much information at the touch of a button, or so many people do now. And to have access to information. And sometimes or a lot of time, be really empowering to understand what is happening to you, to find books, to find resources, to find support groups, to find other communities who can mirror your experience and who understand what you're going through. But then there's also this self-diagnosis of, I need something to be wrong with me because I don't want to look at the underlying behavior or the underlying cause or something like that. I'd rather just have a label, an identifier, and go to a doctor and say, I've got this, please give me something to make it go. It's also that instant gratification culture that we live in. I want something that's going to make it go away.
That's so profound. I think we do live in a culture that says the instant gratification, although I've heard it, I think I've heard it for the first time, that take a pill and you'll be all right. Yeah. It will go away. And I guess that in that, one of my questions is also what's most misunderstood around the symptoms of trauma. What is it? If you're self-diagnosing, there must be some misunderstanding of symptoms of trauma as well.
Yeah, I think just to say I don't diagnose. I'm not
No.
I can deliver a particular clinical intervention, but I'm not at the diagnosing end of things.
Yes.
But yeah, I think I mentioned it already. What has been the biggest shift in understanding is not that there's something wrong with you, that these symptoms are malfunctions, they're pathologies. It's the idea that they are an adaptive response to something terrible, something threatening that happened to you. And therefore, it's resilience. It's a mark of resilience. These strategies that you resorted to from your toolkit, your body-mind toolkit, got you out of that situation or got you through that situation and enabled you to survive. And they may be maladaptive now in the present, but they served a purpose. They served a purpose. There's an honoring there. There's an honoring of our body minds there, which was absent before. And I think that's the big misunderstanding and where so much shame and stigma comes from, is that there's this idea that something's wrong with me, something's malfunctioning, I'm broken. But it's actually not. It's resilience. The idea is when someone starts asking, and this is the sort of big shift over the last couple of decades in the world of trauma research and treatment, is when people start asking, okay, what happened to you? Compassionate, what happened to you? Then we can understand, if we have traumatic stress or PTSD, understand it and conceive it and process it in a completely different way, from a much more empowering perspective. There's a little quote that I wanted to read you, actually, by a very respected trauma researcher, Judith Herman. She's a professor of clinical psychiatry at Harvard. researcher and author, and she's particularly worked deeply with people who've experienced domestic violence and incest. But this is just an incredible quote. No intervention that takes power away from the survivor can possibly foster their recovery, no matter how much it appears to be in their immediate best interest. So to me, anything that is telling someone that there's something wrong with them that needs to be, there's something fundamentally wrong and malfunctioning with them, is taking agency and power and self-worth away from that person. And so any intervention that emphasizes helping that person understand themselves and their symptoms differently, and which in itself might enable them to move past those coping mechanisms just by getting that clarity of understanding and that shift of perspective, but also that gives them tools that perhaps they never had to self-regulate and help their own nervous system back to or towards baseline, towards a calmer state, whether that's breathing tools, quite often body-based tools, because trauma it's living in our body, it's in our nervous system.
Yes.
It's not something you can talk yourself out of.
No.
We make stories about it after the event, but the traumatic response itself happens in our bodies and is stored in our bodies. So working with tools for self-regulation that help us regulate our emotions and be able to be present with difficult, challenging feelings instead of reaching for the bottle. I'm speaking for myself here. I used to drink a lot and take drugs, and I had an eating disorder for 12 years. So those were things I reached for rather than sit with
The pain.
really difficult, the pain, the suffering.
Yeah.
But body work, particularly yoga for me, gave me, and breathing practices gave me the capacity to hold those things, to be with them, so that those moments of discomfort and that nervous charge and nervous system charge could find a way out of my system. That's the word, dissipate.
Yeah.
And that's what it needs. It needs space and witnessing. It's not mysterious. It needs space and witnessing, maybe a bit of movement, maybe deep belly breathing to lower your heart rate, to lower your breathing rate, to lower your blood pressure. And then there's a new toolkit that enables meeting life in a healthier way, in a way that supports well-being, in a way that supports calmer, more supportive relating. I hope that was a helpful perspective.
Yeah, it does. And actually, the word that's been popping in my mind is radical acceptance. There's a sense around accepting where you are, and what you're describing is, and that does take courage to do that, to say, I'm not going to reach for that chocolate bar or whatever, soothe myself around that. There is a practice, and it's about patience with ourselves, that healing takes time to do, that it's not like taking a medicine or a paracetamol. It's not going to be immediate. We do know that paracetamol, what's the word? They hide the pain, don't they? It's only a temporary intervention. So just a sort of couple of other questions. The work of Gabor Maté, how has that sort of expanded people's awareness around that?
Yeah, I think what's been incredible about their work is, firstly, that's where, just to say it again, that's where that question of what happened to you rather than what's wrong with you came from.
Yes.
I would say there are
what happened to you?
There are others like Judith Herman and other incredible researchers, Mark Wallin as well, Rachel Yehuda, who looked at children, did a lot of research with children of Holocaust survivors, really asking what happened and reframing things in terms of that. So that has been crucial. What else? Van der Kolk's book in particular, Body Keeps the Score, really brought home the message of the traumatic stress and PTSD being a function of events of the past living on in our bodies in the present, and constantly being reactivated, this word trigger, re-triggered, by
Yeah.
even innocuous events, such that they interfere with living and relating healthily and calmly in the present day, and being able to be present with life unfolding. Yeah, it's this idea of the past living on in the present instead of staying in the past. I think it's just a much more compassionate, non-pathologizing approach that honors the individual and honors the complexity and genius of the human organism as a whole, and also, crucially, that you cannot cut the body out of treatment.
Oh.
There's been a lot of writing and commentary about psychiatry hasn't, in all the years that the profession of psychiatry has been getting older and growing, we've got sicker in terms of mental health. And because the emphasis has been on trying to talk and cognitively use cognition and analyze our way out of to talk to the mind, or medicate and suppress everything, numb everything. And then the body wasn't really even considered in treatment options.
No.
And when Van der Kolk, so he did the first ever clinical trial of randomized controlled trial looking at trauma sensitive yoga as an adjunctive treatment option for PTSD compared to SSRIs, for depression, I think it was depression, versus SSRIs, so antidepressant drugs, pharmaceuticals basically. And that was in 2014, and it was funded by the National Institutes of Health. And at the end of that study, he said, and I'm slightly paraphrasing here because I haven't got the exact quote in the front of my mind, but he said, the data is astonishing. I've never seen any drug trial that's had results as impressive as this. However, unfortunately, I don't see any big pharma companies opening yoga studios anytime soon. He really pioneered that trauma-sensitive yoga, feel the trauma. There are other pioneers as well, including the people that trained me in that particular modality of trauma-sensitive yoga, which is the only one that is evidence-based. But he really pioneered that, and people, and as did, as you mentioned, Gabor Maté, really saying you've got to look at what is happening in the body and how our nervous system has been helping us survive, and talk to that and speak to that, and not try and just address the mind and talk our way out of traumas. We can go round and round and round in circles doing that. So I would say that's been just a huge contribution from those kind of pioneers, really. If it would be, I noted down here because I thought you'd said to me, do you have any definitions of trauma when we were chatting before that you really like? And I'd said, yeah, there are a few. One of them is any event or experience that overwhelms our capacities to cope. But there are also a couple of lovely, I think, quotes from Van der Kolk and Gabor Maté that really explain it quite beautifully. And so I noted them down. So this is Gabor Maté. Trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. The origin of the word trauma is the Greek for wound. Trauma is a wound. If the wound was great enough, you get a big scar. And it's without nerve endings, so you can't feel. And it would be much less flexible. Scar tissue is tough and hard. It would be much less flexible than your normal tissue. Trauma is when there is a loss of feeling and there's a reduced flexibility in responding to the world. It's a psychic wound that hardens you psychologically and then interferes with your ability to grow and develop. So without knowing it, your whole life is regulated by fear and pain that you're trying to escape from in various ways.
Wow.
Gabor Maté. And then there's a slightly shorter one, but no less, from Bessel van der Kolk. Trauma is not just an event that took place sometime in the past. It's also the imprint left by that experience on mind, brain, and body. This imprint has ongoing consequences for how the human organism manages to survive in the present. It changes not only how we think and what we think about, but also our everyday capacity to think.
This is so powerful, so
It is.
powerful. As I've been listening to you and hearing what you're saying, I've also been kind of processing myself a little bit. So it's a gift. It makes me realize that some of what you were talking about, trigger points, but actually the message that I think you're communicating very powerfully is about what happened to you rather than what's wrong with you. So I think it's a very important what happened to you, and as a way of beginning the journey around healing. Because I think it is about, we're not just talking about trauma, and it's also about healing ourselves and living what you said earlier on, a healthy, enabling, joyful life that is rooted in the present and not being driven by the past.
Exactly.
In its behaviors and the choices we make, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a beautiful summary. Thank you. And just not, as we've talked about, as an addendum to that last point, being misunderstood or not believed, but particularly by a medical professional and someone in a position of power with a white coat on, could make things even worse. There's a posh word for it, and I can't think of it at the moment, but clinician-caused trauma. And I've seen it. It begins with an I, and I can't recall it in this moment, but I've seen it firsthand. I worked with someone on a retreat who was committed to psychiatric care at the age of 14, restrained, drugged, all the usual behaviors in psychiatric institutions to control and manage and numb that person to get them to cooperate. And she subsequently developed severe anorexia and bulimia while in psychiatric care.
Wow.
In response to this that lasted for 30 years of her life.
Oh, gosh.
Just
Painful.
Be mindful that it's fair to not take that initial no for an answer, and that you have a right to be understood and believed.
Charlotte, thank you so much. It feels really luscious, very healing, and I love the monkey going backwards and forth. Actually, I should tell people you're in the Amazon. Yes. Hey, you're not in London somewhere. You're actually in the Amazon. So thank you so much. It has felt so beautiful in so many different ways, and time has just flown for me.
It has. And thank you so much for giving me the space to talk about these things.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for your input. If you're interested in working with me, connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or www.nitasharma.com. And if you enjoyed the podcast, why not consider subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you have access to your podcast, and leave a review.